All right, well, it's 11 o'clock, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Good morning. So, thanks for those of you who are here in person, and thanks to all of you who are joining online. Um, Kathleen and I are really pleased to be able to be here to give you an update on where we are with planning the Beacon budget model as we work towards implementation of the model. So what we wanted to do today is just give you an update of where we're at. But also show you what some of the numbers look like using the previous fiscal year, so we can start to see not just conceptually what the model does, but also how it starts to look in terms of the numbers. And I want to emphasize this is an example of what it could look like. There's still the model still being fully developed, but it'll help us all see what it looks like. We'll give an update on the model, as I said, give the 24 results, and then we'll just talk about what are some of the immediate next steps as we continue to work towards implementation. We've designed this morning, so we should be able to get through our material fairly quickly, and we're hoping, to have plenty of time to answer questions and engage in dialogue about this very important initiative that can benefit the entire campus community. So again, just to remind everybody what the basic design of the model is. Again, this is a hybrid model. So where we're moving from what has been, a more centralized historical incremental model to a model that helps move us more towards a hybrid, centralized, decentralized budget that also helps everybody see not just budget transparency at sort of the high campus level, but to see where revenues are coming from and where the expenses are located, and then how the resources flow through the financial structure of the university. So, we can see, our main revenue sources, which are appropriations and the state appropriation, which over the last 2-3 years has been very strong for the campus. The state is absolutely and stepping up their investment. Our net tuition and fees that comes from our students, and then there are other miscellaneous sources of revenue. These then feed directly into what we call our ARS centers, which is our academic and resource service centers. And this is mainly our major academic units, our colleges and schools, and some of the major auxiliaries. And then from there, the revenues are apportioned to cover the expenses in the support units. So those are allocations that come out of those revenues. Strategic initiatives where we have reserves to make sure that those things that aren't necessarily part of the regular operating budget, but allow us to make sure that the university is moving forward and protected as we implement the strategic plan, as we position ourselves to be able to continually advance and improve UMass Boston and its mission. And then to have funds for subventions where there are deficits. We have to have ways in the ARS centers. We have to have mechanisms to make sure that we can cover those deficits. But this also then allows us to better track in all of us to be able to see how the resources are flowing. So want to talk a little bit, just again, most of this is a reminder, just then how we allocate the resources that come in. And I want to talk about the base model and then a couple of adjustments that we've made recently. That as the funds go into the ARSs, the tuition and fee gets allocated, for the undergraduate and graduate doctoral tuition and general fees, 80% for college of instruction. So how many students are actually taught in the classes of that academic unit, and 20% the College of Record. How many students is that their major program of study or the program that they're in? For the two colleges where we have tuition differentials, which is the Manning College and the College of Management, that tuition differential 100% goes to that unit. Where we have special programs, 100% of that goes to the College of Instruction, so where the instruction takes place. Where we do have non-credit tuition, that's going to go directly into, we're still developing the Office of Community and Executive Education, where we're housing all of our non-credit work. That's thus far been a very small part of the university's activity and budget, but that's something that, again, is a strategic priority to grow in the future, and that will be its own unique ARS center, because they have a different both revenue and expense profile than do the other major academic units. And then, as always, student fees will continue to be applied directly to the purpose of those fees. That's, again, from ethical, legal, and contractual reasons, we want to make sure that we're, applying those fees with integrity. So the state appropriation, once we covered, central costs, is allocated then to the ARSs on three ways. 45% of that is by the number of degrees awarded in the ARS. 40% is allocated as a proportion of the head count based on the 2-year retention rate. So the way this works, that given the number of students you have, you get in your head count, you get a certain amount of the state appropriation, but then each ARS, each college and school also, we've been developing retention targets, and if they meet those targets, they get the full allocation. If they don't, we still haven't determined the exact percentage. There's a small, let me emphasize, small percentage that comes back to go into a student success support pool, that so that we can make sure that we're investing in ways that directly benefit student success. And then for research, 15% of the allocation is based on the indirect research revenue. Now, this is a change in what we've shared in the early drafts of the model. Previously, we had looked at doing this based on the total direct research revenue. But given various conversations that we've had in forums like this, certainly with the deans and other academic leaders, with some of the previous conversations we've had in forums like the Budget and Long Range Planning Committee, given that feedback, we took a step back so that we could look at what was the best way and what worked best for our campus. Different campuses do this in different ways. What fit our campus best in terms of how to allocate the research revenue. And for a variety of reasons, after considering the input that we received, we decided that it was better to use the indirect rather than direct, because there are numerous reasons, and I'll just highlight a couple of them that make good sense. One is direct expenditures are in much of the direct expenditures end up being passed through for the university. They're paying for other things other than the core activities of the university. And there are different indirect cost recovery rates on different grants. So the indirect cost recovery actually then applies more to the things that are necessary to operate the university, and particularly to make sure that we can continue to do things like support research and scholarly activity. We also look how it fit with the profile of the university, and it does help us sort of better appropriate the the indirect cost recovery to things like where people have to pay for research space and those costs. So there's a better ratio of sort of where the research costs are and how the percentage of the state appropriation that goes to support research fits the model for this particular campus. So now we're going to switch so that to sort of talking about sort of where we are in the development of the model to say, okay, so what does this mean? What does it look like when we actually plug dollars into it? And so Kathleen's going to go through that. And I do want to say this is still a heuristic model. It's to help us see things. And where it's landing, we are going to continue to make adjustments, right? Based on what we're seeing in the numbers, so we can get as good a fit as possible for the campus. And looking at real numbers is very helpful that way. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen to walk through the actual numbers.
Thank you, Joe. We see we have some questions coming through. We do have a section on the presentation for Q&A, so we'll pull those questions in as we when we get to that portion of our program today. So to follow up with what Joe has been saying, so what we're planning to present today is taking fiscal 24's results and applying the Beacon budget model to it. So you could see if we had the Beacon budget model in place, how the university's financial picture would look. So this is what you've seen before. You might have seen this before in other forums. These are our audited financial results for fiscal 24. So, you know, the university having $545 million worth of revenue and an operating margin of 3.9% last year of $21 million. So this is what we've had. This was our results. So when we go to the Beacon budget model, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but bear with me. So what we hear, the major categories, revenues. So these are the same kinds of revenues that you're experienced with our regular model. You know, major categories, tuition and fees, grants, ESS, auxiliary state appropriation, and all the revenues. You got revenues, you've got direct expenses, things that apply directly to a particular ARS. So these are all our ARS centers. As Joe mentioned in the structure, here's all of the colleges of the universities. We also have centers, freestanding centers and institutes as their own ARS. If you are a center and institute tied to a particular college, your activities within that college. But for the freestanding centers and institutes, then we have our auxiliary operations. These are things like dining, the bookstore, those kinds of parking, those kinds of activities. And then we did push out federal stimulus money. This has varied over the last several years, but we put that as its own thing. This will go away when there isn't any stimulus money, but it's a one-time kind of activity. So we didn't want it swaying the results of what we would see in the ARS centers. So we've got revenues, we have direct expenses. These are direct expenses that a particular college or ARS center would have that goes to them, both payroll and non-payroll costs. Then we have the indirect expense allocations. These are the academic support units that you saw in the previous slide. And for us, we have 4 major categories of allocations. 3 of them are here: academic support, student services, and then the university's physical plant. And then we also have central services, which will come off the state appropriation, and we'll see that a little bit in another slide. So you'll see this gets back down to here's our $21 million operating margin. So you've got all the revenues, direct expenses, and then indirect expenses. So on the revenue, just to sort of build this out a little bit more, revenues, these are all the things that you might have seen in the ongoing operations of the university. We have all the different kinds of tuition and fees revenue, whether you've got resident, non-resident, graduate, we back out our financial aid, grants and contracts. We've got federal grants, state grants, local grants, private grants, all those split out. Now, so when Joe was talking about the allocation of the state appropriation using indirect costs, reminder, any direct cost goes directly to the college of where the grant is. So all of everybody's direct money is within the particular college where the grant was awarded. The indirect is used for that 15% allocation of the state appropriation money. So it's additional revenue that goes to the ARS center. We've got ESS. ESS sort of, it's what you'd think if you have it being generated in a particular college, it stays in that college. Then we have our auxiliaries. Most of the activity you see is over obviously the auxiliary column, state appropriation. Other operating, these are things like interest income, just miscellaneous gifts, miscellaneous kinds of activities that come. Oh, gifts is its own line, but other kinds of miscellaneous revenue. We've got gifts, we've got investment income, endowment income. Endowment income goes directly to the restrictions. So all these different kinds of revenue. So it just splits it out. And I think, this creates a transparency that we haven't really necessarily seen, right? In the past, usually I come up here and I talk about, here's $545 million worth of gross revenue, and here's the major categories. Now you can sort of see, well, where is it coming from, and what kinds of different levers do we have in some of our different colleges and universities? So you see some of the strengths of different colleges shine through in some of these numbers. So to talk about their tuition for a minute, so this is 80% to the College of Instruction and 20% to the College of Record. That was developed over, a number of months through the steering committee and work that we've done previously as an institution. But this just sort of shows you how, last year we had $203 million worth of undergraduate tuition and fees revenue. And when we apply the model to it, this is how it gets broken out across our different colleges on campus. And the same thing with the graduate. So you've got the graduate, we had 29 million, almost $30 million here, and how that got split out as well. So this, and this shows you how we have the different, for credits for the instruction, for our majors, and you can start to see where, how that splits out. On the state appropriation, last year the state came in at $210 million of support for UMass Boston, historic high level. So the first thing we do in the model is we're taking off all of the central units costs, as well as any kind of special earmark that might come to a particular, if there's a college that has a particular earmark, the state legislature says, this is for whatever program, or this is for, those go direct to that particular source. And then we have $128 million here that's available for allocation to the ARS centers. And so, we split that out based on the 15% to research, 45% to graduations, degrees awarded, and 40% to retention. So you see how that sort of plays out across different colleges in terms of what percent of those categories gets allocated to each college. So you see this across the whole set. So there's your 128 million. It gets split up through all the colleges. On the expense side, just to provide some information around direct expenses. These are the expenses that would be directly incurred by a particular ARS center or the auxiliary. So it's many of the things that you might expect to see here. Payroll, that's one of the biggest ones. So we've got all kinds of different payrolls, administrative expenses that would be direct to a college, consulting, depreciation. Depreciation in general is allocated as part of the physical plant allocation. Auxiliaries do get charged directly for their portion of depreciation. So we do depreciate the assets that are in use for our auxiliary operations. Most notably, you could think of the parking garage and the parking lots. Those would be something that would be an example of that. And then we've got, equipment. We've got different principal and interest. I would say nobody gets charged. That also gets that's part of our allocation for the physical plant. Again, the auxiliaries get charged that because they've got some direct debt, that we have debt out there that's paying for some of the assets there. And then there are different, student aid, service and supply, travel, conferences. All these are direct. These are the kinds of, if you had restricted money that was for restricted use in a particular area, all that gets baked into these numbers. Then for the indirect, so after we get through, we've got revenues, we've got our direct expenses, we see where that looks. Then we take a look, okay, what about the indirect expense allocations that distribute all the costs that we have to go about doing the business of the university, right? Not every area of our university generates revenue, but it helps. All these areas are helping support the university and helping our students in the work that we do. So we have on the academic affairs, academic support side, this will just provide you what goes into that. These are all the departments that go into the academic support areas and get allocated out. And then we also have the student services. So these three areas are part of the student services, get allocated out. And then our university physical plant, this is the facilities department as well as our debt service. So I think we've had other sessions where we have had, for example, the student services is allocated by student FTEs. One thing we have updated since we last met is we're doing these on a 3-year average. So this is going to allow us to be able to plan for changes and ups and downs, right? Because we don't want any particular area to have a huge cliff, like something happened and some, the number of your graduates went down a lot in a particular, we want to be able to smooth that out over time. So we built that in. We do have, I will say, there's an FAQ out on the website. So if you want to go, that has in detail, like what we have for like, okay, this is for your student FTEs, this one we may be using staff FTEs. So you can see all that, and it provides some additional information there. So I think that covers sort of, so and you get, see, when we got done with actually allocating all these indirect expenses, we're back to that $21 million of cost of margin that we had last year. So it's a little bit different kind of perspective, right, than what we saw when we looked back at that first page of just the university's income statement there, right on a very consolidated level. So we will be making all these numbers available so that you can dig into them and take a look at them in greater detail. But this is 1 year. So I mean, we will look at modeling, the current year's budget, and ultimately we will be budgeting for under this structure, and then operating the university with the model. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe next to talk about a few next steps that you can plan to see with our project.
Thanks, Kathleen. So, I do just back to a couple of things I said before, because everybody always likes to look at the bottom line too, right? And there are, as Kathleen was saying, some variations for each of the major units, the ARSs, in terms of, right, who's on the plus side and who's on the minus side. In making the adjustments to the model to get it started to make it work, again, this is more transparent so everybody can see sort of how the funds are flowing. But the model fits, we don't have, compared to some of the variations that we looked at in the way other universities sort of create allocations, in early variations, we had some much bigger swings, right, between how much a particular unit was in the black or was in the red, and it's been compressed quite a bit. And we think that's important because this is an actual representation of how resources flowed throughout 2024. So now we can see that. And so one of the things early on I said that we have to pull some money for subvention. That is so that if somebody's in the red here, then do we have funds to help cover that? And we're still figuring out, that's still a part of the model that we're going to figure out is, what is the metrics that we're going to use to determine how to address that subvention. But over time, the idea is once we see where there are imbalances in the budget, then we can all work together and be purposeful about how to better align, right, where the resources are coming from and where the expenses are. And then everybody can see it much more clearly in charts like this, even if there's a lot of numbers to look at. So in terms of next step, as Kathleen mentioned, we are continuing to update the website. So we really encourage everybody to be looking at, and checking in regularly on the BBM webpage. And we have a whole series of FAQs from questions that we've been asked before in sessions like this, along with other things that occur to us, right, that people might wonder about. And even the questions that we received today that we're about to get to, we're recording this, we'll be looking at those, and we know, even though it looked like when I last checked, we had a pretty good sizable number of people online, not everybody's able to get to this session. So we have this recorded, but we'll also take the key questions and put them up on the website. So we really want to keep everybody updated. We want everybody to get their questions answered, and we want to be very transparent about all of this. We are doing also ongoing consultation with the Faculty Council's Budget and Long Range Planning Committee. We've covered this several times with them, but we'll be really digging in depth into some of these numbers. And again, they're getting to see these numbers just like everybody else. And so we want to make sure that they're helping us think through what are the implications of the model as we get ready to, not just use it as a shadow, right? This is essentially a shadow budget, but get ready to implement it and go live. Yeah, and so we'll continue to pilot various portions of the model during FY 25 and 26 is, that we get ready for, FY 27 with a launch. And, that includes some things like looking at, some special pilots to see how different initiatives work. For example, in the College of Management, they have a special arrangement with EM Normandy. So that's actually a lever, right? When you have other special programs that different colleges can use. So what does it look like if, allocating that directly the special programs to a particular college, and then how do they develop a budget to plan for and utilize those resources to cover their strategic priorities within the college. So at the campus level, these pilots still allow us, as we're sharing these numbers now, to be very transparent about the budget. But at the local level, within the different colleges and schools, for folks then to be really able to do some very specific planning about how they can best utilize, right, the resources to be more masters of their own destiny. So we'll continue to look for opportunities to expand that. And then we're gonna come back together here or a nearby location at the end of the semester, April 29th. Well, after further consultation, further upgrades in the model, we'll be back to answer your questions and provide you with further updates. So this is very much as this gets more fully developed in real time, we want to engage with all of you in the campus community to make sure that we're giving you the best information, but we're also learning from your insights and your questions as we refine and get the model ready for full launch. So with that, I think we're going to turn it over to questions and answers. Oh, okay, yeah, and we did get a question in advance.
So one of the questions that came in advance was Dorchester Bay City. How does Dorchester Bay City affect the model? So the short answer, when we're looking at fiscal 24, it didn't affect the model because the project is still underway. So let's see here.
Well, I was trying to find the question.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Okay, I guess you just
we gotta keep. Okay, so to answer, so for Dorchester Bay City, so that project's still underway right now. It's scheduled to close by July. So say let's move ourselves forward to July, and so the project closed. So here the university receives a lump sum amount of money, a minimum of $192 million. So that's money that's restricted for capital. So you're not going to see it in the model because it's capital money. But some of the uses that we have for it, you will see in the model. So we pay off the debt on Dorchester Bay City on the parking lot at Bayside. So that's one of the things. So that would be decreased depreciation. So you'd see that being reflected in the physical plant allocation that's in the indirect allocations. We also will be paying off the $50-some million worth of short-term debt that we have out there for the remainder of the SDCUNY project. That would decrease interest costs that the university is incurring. So that would also be a reduction in one of the allocations that would be being made to the colleges. The third item you can expect to see as well, we don't recognize $192 million worth of income in the year it closes. We have to recognize that out over the period of the lease that the building authority has with Accordia. So there's some other revenue that comes in that would be in the other revenue line that gets allocated. It's not it's an accounting entry. It's not cash, but it's revenue that we count for over the life of the deal. Then you'd see the remaining cash is going to generate interest income. The interest income that's allocated to ARS centers, similar to the state appropriation. So we do have some other revenues that sort of track is how the appropriation is allocated. And then as we plan out of our capital budget, capital projects, then that money gets deployed for use with the campus master plan and would be deployed for capital projects. And then we would just plan for the interest The interest income would be adjusted downward because we would be earning interest on it. We have that money put to use in building buildings and making improvements here on campus. So that's a little bit of what Dorchester Bay City would look like. But for when we look at this 24 activity, we don't really expect it could affect us here in 25. If Accordia came up and said, we're going to close in May, then we'll start to see some of this activity here currently in fiscal 25. But more likely, they probably close when they have through July. So probably we see this over the summer, and then this activity gets picked up in fiscal 26. And you'll see that budgeted when we present the budget for 26. You'll see all this activity there. That's where we're looking at right now. And then the other question we have is just how do we find out? Are there sessions? And so we have a session today. I think as Joe said, we have another session in April.
All right, we're gonna go to questions now. Looks like Maria Rinker has a question. Maria, go.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. It's super valuable to see this kind of simulation with some numbers. We've been looking at the plan without numbers and scratching our heads. So thank you so much for that. I just have a few questions. So I'm in the CLA budget and planning committee, and we have been looking at like how the levers, trying to understand how some of the levers work in terms of incentivizing some of the things that are stated as the main values of the new budget. And one of these is high impact research. But as far as we can see, it's only the state appropriation, the 15% of the state appropriation that's based on research is only based on grants and contracts. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how the model might incentivize research that is not based on grants.
Yeah, that's a really important question, and that's great. So the model in the allocation is is based on revenue. The revenue has to come from somewhere, right? So the sponsored research with the direct and the indirect expenditures, those are actual revenues that the university receives. So we have to have some way of using that for the allocation. And so that's the cleanest way to do that. But one of the reasons that the allocation, though, isn't tied just directly to the grants and contracts, that it comes to the college as a whole, so that the college can determine how best to use those resources. So that way it makes sure that, if it's a strategic priority for a particular college to be supporting, different types of research, then that's up to those units to determine, what are those priorities and how does that get allocated. Right now we don't have, any actually mechanism like that, but this model allows us then to give, colleges and schools, the ARS's centers and institutes, a way to see what the source of the revenues are that could then come to them to support different types of strategic priorities. We are trying to stay away from a one-to-one correlation for that. We only support the work that gets funded. This is not, if we went to the full extreme, right, of an activities-based budget where, all the revenues you generate through research or tuition you keep, and then that pays for all of your expenses, that makes it very difficult for different academic units and research units to be able to support other research that doesn't have, like we have many fields that there's just not the same opportunity either for things like federal grants or higher indirect cost recovery rates. Those type of models make that very difficult. This type of model, because it's more balanced, still gives each unit an opportunity to decide how, with the resources that they have, what they can prioritize in terms of things like the type of and the ways in which that they're going to support research.
Oh, can I do a follow-up?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I appreciate that, but because I'm also assuming that the model that we have is really a different model than an activity-based model that's not based on values, right? So the way that the document reads is that the budget model is one that is supposed to meant to incentivize the values of the universities, not necessarily the highest income, right?
Right.
Right. So like I think that like so I would urge you to go further in terms of, you know, really finding levers that actually would create the kind of values that the university states that it has. And a similar issue is not just in the revenue side, but in the expense side in the terms of cost of space. So currently the way that the budget looks, it looks like you incentivize non-use of space. And I really encourage you to think through that, whether that is what you would like to incentivize.
Yeah, thanks for it. I think that, let me start with the space. That one way or another, that space gets charged and hits the budget. And so what we've tried to do is come up with a way to address that makes it, again, clear and transparent, sort of how the space is being used. Now, in the model, we're not charging the units for all space, only the specific research dedicated space. And this provides the best balance of where the general space that is, you know, broadly used by the campus, you know, sort of is distributed, right, in terms of how that's paid for across the entire campus, which again is, I think, very much in keeping with, you know, the spirit of what we're trying to do. But for the research specific space, there are more costs that go with that. And so we're also not trying to pass those costs on to the other places that don't have access to and aren't utilizing the space. But one of the reasons we made an adjustment in the model to look at the indirect cost rather than the direct cost.
Can you explain that a little? Can you explain this indirect a little bit more? I'm not sure I fully understood that.
Yep, sure. I'll be glad to. I'll say that one of the reasons we made the shift, and then I'll define direct and indirect costs, was one of the things it does really well for the campus is it helps even out how the research space is getting charged. So it's not as strong of a hit on the units that have, it's a more balanced approach to covering the space. Now, the direct expenditures are for all the grants and contracts that we get that are externally sponsored. The direct expenditures are those portions of the budget that directly pay for the activities of the grant, whether that's paying for graduate research assistantships, lab equipment, supplies, course buyouts, ad comp, participant fees and training, anything that the grant is directly paying for that's an activity and is in the budget of the grant, that's a direct expenditure. The indirect is the overhead, is the cost, the facility and administrative costs that need to be recovered, that every university has indirect cost recovery that's based on how much do we invest in, again, things like support for facilities, infrastructure, administration, such as, all of the things that have to go into compliance, which is significant these days. Grants administration. So all those things get paid for by the indirect, and the indirect cost recovery actually doesn't even cover 100% of the university's expenses, but there's a federal formula, a whole process that we just went through that sets our indirect cost recovery rates. And so again, we decided to base the state appropriation on how much indirect is coming in to directly support, right, the research activities, including the space. rather than the direct expenditures, which are more pass-throughs. This is pretty telling in the current environment, and I'd be remiss if I didn't
Yeah.
say something about that. You know, with now, you know, all of the various attempts to restrict research funding and particular types of research funding, and including there's a hearing tomorrow on the injunction led by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and Attorney General Campbell, and we provided a lot of the first ones to provide the data for that. You know, that caps that indirect cost recovery at 15%. So we're doing everything we can to protect the university, you know, with to make sure that we are actually getting our legal and fair share of the indirect cost recovery that should be coming with these grants.
Okay. Thank you so much. I have another question, but I would leave somebody else to ask first, and then I can return to it. But my last question is about like the indirect active expenses for centers, the slide you had, but I can get back to that if there's time.
All right, thanks, Maria.
Yeah, I just would say, I think, you know, final thing about the whole indirect area is this is an area where we receive feedback after some of our initial discussions around the model, where, you know, I would encourage you, as you think of this, if there's things you're seeing that you're saying like, hey, I want to raise my hand and say, did you consider this? I mean, we had a number of faculty and leaders say, let's talk about research a little bit more, because maybe there's some other ways we look at it. So, you know, I would just encourage people, you know, this model becomes better through the work of all of us. So, you know, I think this is an example where, you know, I think we've really updated some of our original thinking to say, okay, well, let's really take a look and figure this out in a way that's going to advance the university. So, yeah, I would be remiss if we didn't mention that. I would just encourage people, if you start to see things, by all means, feel free to, you know, bring them up so we can take a look at them.
Other questions?
Anything for anybody in the audience? Nobody has a question about this, not one single one.
Oh, we got a hand raised.
Oh, we have a hand raised.
Well, that means we can.
Oh, that's me still. That's my center question in case.
Oh, there's two hands. So Karen Horn has a question too. Karen?
I think that I am still unclear about the research revenue that the question Maria had. And I think maybe I'm just unclear about the budgeting in general. And so maybe it's worth it to put the slides back up. So when we're thinking about research, the 15% that comes from the state in terms of state allocations, we're thinking about research revenues. That's different than thinking about research rewarding departments for having grants. But that is part of the revenues, right? So I think I'm confused, right? So we have this state money that comes in. Some of it is actually tied to the overhead that faculty got through grants that they have won, like federal government overhead, and that comes through state appropriation.
Yeah.
Is it that there's the state gives us money and then we take some of it to reward research?
Right, okay, I'm getting some of the, yes, that's actually a very helpful clarifying question, right? So where we're dividing up the state appropriation, that 15% doesn't have to go just to research. What we're doing is using our mission to say what are some again, transparent, evidence-based ways to allocate the state appropriation rather than just being historical, you know. So what is the basis by which each college, each ARS should get a percentage of the state appropriation? And so we are a research university. So some universities, you know, say that aren't a research university, don't necessarily give any of the state appropriation based on research activity. It's all strictly based on things like enrollment or student success indicators. So the fact that we are allocating the state appropriation to be used within the college to support their operations and strategic priorities, however they see fit and what they need to do, given the different ways that each college or school or center and institutes contributes to the mission of the university, they have more control over those, how they use those funds. So many universities, like 15% based on research is relatively high when you look at even peer institutions that have a model like this, but we do think it's important to recognize and value the research contributions of the university. We are very proud that we're a research university, now an R1 university. But the 85%, the reason for our existence is our students. And so we wanted to make sure that since the tuition comes in just on the basis of how many students we're serving in different ways, the allocation we wanted to focus on how do the resources follow our ability to support student success. So both of those metrics are different ways to recognize and essentially reward student success, both in terms of the retention rate, how well are we getting students off to a good start, because that's our undergraduate students, that's the foundation for success going forward, but also total degrees awarded, because that also captures graduate student success, transfer student success, so that it gives us a more holistic way of allocating the state appropriation.
Yeah, just to sort of follow up on that. So when the state appropriates the money to the university, so there is some that's restricted to particular uses. In this model, those go to those restricted uses. So we have certain colleges who get like direct state support for some of their programs. Those go to the colleges. We get money from the state for mental health. That goes direct for the mental health work that the university is doing. We have student financial aid. State's appropriated $15 million worth of new state money for student financial aid. That goes direct to students. So the portion that we're allocating is the general support that the Commonwealth gives us as a state institution. So we as a college, same as every other public higher ed institution of the state, can determine through our budget process how we allocate those monies. Now, some of you might be thinking, but I know the Commonwealth they also give us a fringe rate, right, when we use this money for payroll. So we do have a process behind the scenes. This is the budget overlay. We still will be administering the state appropriation so that we can get the full amount of fringe money on the dollars, because for every state dollar that the Commonwealth appropriates for us, if we pay for payroll with it, we also get fringe, which is another 40-some cents on the dollar. So that's going to happen behind the scenes. So that's something that your assistant deans may, they'll be in touch, the budget office will be in touch with that, but that's not something you need to worry about. This is really just looking at, we get the general support from the Commonwealth. How do we allocate it, given the values and the objectives that we have for the university in using this budget model as a tool? So it's zeroed in on those three major components of, degrees awarded, retention, and then research. But it's a great question. Great question, very important one.
Other questions?
Well, we will have.
We got one.
Okay. So I think so for these units, it's pretty much, this is why we're a hybrid model. So that would be, so as we do look at we do a 5-year projection. So as we forecast out, what are we anticipating for revenues and expenses over the year? These units, as well as this other support units, get a budget target that then fits in. One of the things you've seen during the parallel years is we've changed some of the timing on how that budget works. So these units have to do their budgets much earlier now than they historically have had to under the incremental model, so that we can have that, the budget office can review them, so that then the ARS centers can be provided with, here's what the budgeted costs are for these support units, as well as what we anticipate on the state appropriation. Clearly state appropriation is never final till the legislature and the governor sign off on it. So we always make our best, we working with the university system office. Here's what we're forecasting for the appropriation. And then what we see is it gets closer to July 1, what actually turns out, and then we make final adjustment on the budget.
Yeah, and then I will say on the part about how much of it is really fixed operating costs versus how much is discretionary. We actually have very little discretionary funds in the university. We have tried to, get everything to where sort of the action is. There are pools of funds for strategic priorities, but those aren't, again, just pure discretionary. We identify strategic priorities that then we invest in. And again, this model helps make a lot of that very transparent, but there's not much discretionary funds available on this campus. All right,
Yeah.
Maria?
Yeah, okay, sorry. I can't see the room only if there's nobody else, but I was wondering if you could go one slide back to the expenses, and then I wanted to ask about the centers that clearly come out very much in the red in the current model. Yeah, thank you so much. No, wait, it's maybe one more back. Yes, that one, right? Centers and institutes. And so I'm wondering, why would you charge a center and institute for all these indirect costs of academic support, etc.? That is clearly going to undermine their fiscal viability in a sense. And like each of these students are majors in other places than the centers and institutes, so it also just seems unfair.
So centers and institutes are, cover a lot of, they're very diverse in terms of what they do, but they all still use campus facilities, campus infrastructure, support services. And so that funding needs to come from somewhere. And this just makes it clear and transparent. We do have a subvention, so one of the things, it just makes it, again, transparent that we have to subvent.
No, but isn't it double counting, right? So if a student is a major in, something, management, but also in this center, like, how do you calculate the academics? Like, so it's like the academic support, all these student services, etc., for the centers and institutes when the students that they have are already counted in whatever college or in whatever arts center they're in.
Yeah, so I think with specifically, there is no student, because the students, there are not students who are in there is no student cost charge here. But the academic support, I mean, this is the area where we're housing research administration, for example. So I mean, there is benefits around research administration and that. So we don't parse out these support units to say, well, a particular area uses some of these. I mean, this is the group, and then it's how it's allocated. One of the principles we do have for this model is keeping it as simple as possible too. You can see institutions getting mired down in all kinds of minutia and trying to really adjust it. We want to get something here that's going to be simple, easy to understand, support our strategic plan, and be able to move the university forward. So we do have here some of the academic support. It includes support that would be available to our centers and institutes. And then the physical plant is actually the space on campus that houses these particular areas.
But
Right,
I thought you said that it was only research specific users that were charged for space.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the centers and institutes do have research specific space.
Yeah.
So they do get charged for that. But the other thing I want to say, that how centers and institutes in a lot of these models get treated is they all have to generate all their own revenue to cover their expenses. That's not what we've done here. We have not gone to that extreme because we think that centers and institutes do play a role here. So we're still protecting the investment that the university makes. We're just making it transparent. We did not want to go to the full extreme to essentially defund the centers and institutes where they would only get funding based on the revenue they directly generate. That's very common. That's not what we did because that doesn't fit, again, the values that we built the model.
Yeah, I mean, I think another example, this is auxiliary operations, and every other university, auxiliary operations runs a surplus. I mean, this is by definition, these are areas that are designed to be self-supporting. Here at UMass Boston, I mean, this is primarily driven by the cost of our parking infrastructure. We have an $80 million parking garage that's got debt service. The rates we have don't support the overall cost, but that's part of UMass Boston. So you see it, it's transparent, but it's not like we're saying, oh, we've got to do something draconian here. It's not. This is just taking what we did last year as a university. It's already done. If we had the model, this is what it would look like. So it shows you where we've had to make some investments to support different areas. and where some of the revenues have come from and where the expenses are going. I believe we're at 12 o'clock. So I think if you do have other questions, by all means, feel free to send them to the Beacon. We have a BBM email. You'll see in the FAQs, you can send us some more questions and we can get back to, we'll get the questions here from today posted up on the FAQs as well. So thank you very much for your attendance and in questions and answers for today.
Thank you
Thank
so much.